We'll move through to the deputations by appointment. We have 2 today. There were going to be 3, but one person can't make it. So the first deputation is from the Riccarton Bush Kilmarnock Residents Association. Tony and Tony, welcome. You have 10 minutes, which includes questions and answers as well.
Kia ora koutou. Ko Tony Simons aho. I'm chair of the Riccarton Bush Kilmarnock Residents Association. We cover a small but important area in Lower Riccarton. Our members live north of Riccarton Road between the railway line near Mona Vale and out to Riccarton Bush. And we are directly in the firing line when it comes to this new National Policy Statement on Urban Development. We understand Council has already submitted on the impacts of this policy, and I believe to a large extent Council's concerns were ignored. But we're here today to invite you to do whatever you can within the terms of the statement to make sure that our area is protected from more intensification. My colleague here, Tony Dale, will start the presentation and talk about the bigger picture, and he probably will be telling you things you already know, but we'd like to reinforce them. And then I'll talk specifically about the area that we represent. Thank you again for giving us this opportunity.
Thank you, Tony. Now, yes, at the risk of reminding the committee of what they have said previously, the NPS seems to be a terrible mistake as it is being applied to Christchurch, and the bad effects of this new policy can be predicted. For example, further decay of the city centre, which I think you have talked about yourselves. So this approach has failed before of using key activity centres, and it's beginning to fail again now. Already the implementation of NPSUD has committed one of the cardinal errors of the failed Melbourne 2030 planning policy. This was when people looked at why it failed. So they've ignored, the New Zealand implementation has ignored community input during the so-called consultation phase. This policy seems to have been just pushed through, irrespective of what local communities say. And in the case of Christchurch, the implementation will be toxic, in fact, to desperately needed development of the city centre. And we view this with great concern because not only will the city centre continue to stagnate, but the suburbs, which don't need the kind of huge intensification mooted in the NPS, will be filled up with high-rise buildings and so on, and we'll talk about that more later. And we know that this can happen because after the 2011 earthquakes, we found that Christchurch didn't really need a city centre to keep on functioning, at least not in some sense, but to function as a real city and larger community. We need a city centre, and we need incentives to develop it. So when we look at the simple-minded way, and I've lifted this picture from your own submission, we see that half of Greater Christchurch is due to be rezoned high density with mandated minimum densities and high rises and all sorts of things. This just seems crazy when the city centre needs that high density pushed in, not pulled out. So our view is that the qualifying matter clause of NPS is there to be used, and we hope that the council will use it extensively to protect amenities, because that's the only mechanism that seems to be available. Otherwise, the large area that you can see will be intensified almost at random, and you can just imagine a nice ring of high-rise apartments around Riccarton Bush, for example. So we ask you, please don't use the Melbourne 2030 approach of don't think, just do. Please apply common sense. Because we're coming up to the sharp end of NPS. It's already starting to bite. We notice developments in Jane Dean's Close that are simply flouting the current planning regulations. And we view that with great concern because it makes it look as though the council has simply rolled over and given up. And furthermore, the RMA is being repealed, and part of that repealing process seems to be a further erosion of any mention of amenity values, so the kind of values that make a community worth living in. Amenity values were only mentioned a few times in the RMA, in fact, but used extensively, and obviously the government committee has said, well, we'll put a stop to that. NPSUD only mentions amenities 3 times, and that only to say that amenity values must change. So the protection of the amenity values of our city will be very much left in your lap and the lap of your colleagues, because it's essential to protect amenities if you want a city people actually like to live in. I mean, you can look all around the world for disasters, you know, going right back to English tower block developments and what happened there, and Melbourne 2030, which was a fiasco from the very beginning. So we ask that the council represents the citizens that elected them to the central government. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I'd just like to talk a little bit about the specific matters around Riccarton and a particular area. And as Tony has said, qualifying matters are allowed under the NPSUD, and you as a council have the right to determine what they should be. Everyone has a right to a decent home in Aotearoa. However, rezoning does not build homes, people do. And it certainly doesn't build affordable homes. What it might do, however, is very effectively destroy neighbourhoods and communities. Our focus is on Lower Riccarton, but we have no doubt other areas of Christchurch also deserve your protection. Others, we have no doubt, will welcome high density, and that's fine. But as Tony again has said, we should be consulting around that. We're not against development, but we are against any policy that suggests that there's one national solution for the entire country. Our area, as I say, is Lower Riccarton, north of Riccarton Road. It is the site of the earliest European settlement in Christchurch. We consider it a treasure. It tells the story of that settlement, including that initial collaboration with Ngāi Aruhiri and a community which has been built over 180 years. There are important buildings and notable trees scattered throughout the area. And I suppose I just invite you to imagine what multi-storey buildings might look like overlooking some of these landmarks. And then we have Pūtaringa Motu. This Ngāhere forest is commonly called Dean's Bush or Riccarton Bush. The area is Pūtaringa Motu, or the place that echoes. Perhaps because it's all that was left after the Great Fires swept across the plains in the 14th century. Ngāi Aruhiri had established a pa in this area in 1846 when the Deans brothers leased the land in the area, and that was just 6 years after the treaty was signed. It is a kahikatea forest, and they are swamp-dwelling trees. They are already under pressure from existing intensification that's resulted in even more water being drained away from the area into the city's stormwater system. I don't know if you know this, but irrigation has been installed in the bush. So one gets the feeling that this taonga is already in some trouble. The Riccarton Bush Trust is responsible for its care and its maintenance, and it also has serious concerns and supports us here today. It intends to make a submission to Council and is seeking legal advice regarding Council obligations under the 1914 Riccarton Bush Act. Just two more points I'd like to make before winding this up, and they're quite important. We've been through this all before. Firstly, the residents we represent, and you represent as well, went through lengthy proceedings in 2015 before an independent hearings panel which was set up specifically to promote development in Christchurch. So this work has already been done. That panel, chaired by Sir John Hanson, considered more than 4,800 submissions and it heard all the evidence. That process took 2 years. From the decision on the 10th of December 2015, on the slide, just like to remind you that residents from our area came out in force during this process. The panel listened and when it was all over ruled higher density is not appropriate in our area. Today, 6 years later, nothing has changed. In fact, the case today against density is stronger, because the final point I'd make was in 2015, soon after the earthquakes, with the eastern suburbs devastated, many were worried there'd be a housing supply crisis. Very simply, more houses were built, and today there is no crisis. In fact, I think you possibly would agree there's a housing boom in Christchurch. More than $1 billion worth of new housing has been approved this year. That's 2,800 extra houses in 12 months, the most ever on record, and any argument suggesting more density is needed across the city is weak. The Greater Christchurch Partnership, and a number of you are on that committee, has already determined there is more than enough housing development capacity in Christchurch to meet demand for the next 30 years. So Riccarton residents should not have to go through all of this again. We simply ask, when it comes to our area, Putaringa Motu, Lower Riccarton, the decision by Sir John Hanson and his panel in 2015 needs to be respected and upheld. Thank you very much for listening to us.
Thank you very much. Obviously it's gone over the 10 minutes, but it was good to get your deputation finished, so thank you for coming in today. I'd also just like to note, obviously following the two deputations, we will have the presentation, so council officers are in the room listening to these two deputations and maybe have to respond to some of the points raised, and obviously there'll be questions from councillors as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
The next deputation is from Helen Broughton, speaking to the same item. Kia ora, Helen.
Kia ora. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. For those who are newer to council, the only ones who were there when I was there was Yanni, Jimmy and Erin. I've had a strong interest and background in planning. When I was on council for 13 years, I was on all the council planning committees, and I'm accredited as a resource consent commissioner, and so I'm on a number of panels, and I see the implications of the plan once it gets to a resource consent hearing. I'm concerned that the passage of the National Policy Statement on Urban Development, National Policy Standards, went through Parliament in August 2020 and passed through without great comment. It went through with a lot of legislation. So I believe the public are not fully aware of what's happening. Some are, and there's huge concern. The National Policy Standards needs to inform our regional plan and our district plan. And I want to acknowledge Council's efforts in trying to separate Christchurch out from this statement. You made a lengthy submission, but it really wasn't listened to. I also made one, as did the local association. This will cause concern across Christchurch. And it's at particular risks are the suburbs around a large shopping centre. I've been at 2 meetings where there's been a range of residents. Today I want to focus on the area outlined by the Riccarton Bush Kilmarnock Residents Association. It is the area in which I live, but I'm not a member of the association. I think for us there's a special case. As Tony Simmons said, we went before the independent hearings panel chaired by Sir John Hanson I should say, in 2015, and in 2016 he actually granted our view that we should stay at suburban density. The other area that also did this was the Condell Avenue area, and your chair, Mike Davidson, made a submission, as did Minister Brownlee. So I think there's 2 areas which can be called a special case because they've been before the hearings panel. Council can act on this. You can provide an exemption for these 2 areas as a qualifying matter. You could also look at other areas too and see if they are a qualifying matter. To do this as a council, you need to go through a formal process. I've spoken to the Wellington officer who designed these urban standards, and he has informed me too that this is quite proper and normal. It's just the evaluation process has to be stringent. People, just talking emotionally, people of our area have been through a huge amount of stress in 2015. They felt the area was going to be decimated. They made submissions. There were both people making small submissions and people making lengthy submissions. And to have to go through this again, because Wellington has decided that this is going to happen, just seems impossible. So I'm asking you as a council to be bold, to look carefully at this area and Condell Avenue area and make it a qualifying matter. Apparently, if you make it a qualifying matter and argue it, then that is the end of that. I don't think it has to go to, in fact, Wellington. I'm not totally sure on that, but I don't think it has to pass through Wellington. These national standards are far worse than medium density. This is high density, 6 stories, and if I can give you some numbers from what's currently happening. In medium density, we have an intensification beyond expectations. When the plan came out, it was 30 households per hectare. We're now at 75 households per hectare. So even in our own plan, it's gone beyond what was expected. I know that you've got a challenge ahead. This is not going to be easy, but I'm making a plea, I should say, because I'm speaking here on myself, to please protect this area which we've outlined as a qualifying matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. There's some time questions. Yanni?
Thank you. I guess, have you thought what would happen if all the other residents groups in the city came and said we want our areas to be qualifying as well?
I haven't,
and what
but they
impact would
could,
be?
I guess, yes. There's people are finding out incidentally, actually, and they're getting quite angry. But it's, and I know the other groups are trying to form a group. So there will be a group of residents at some stage coming to speak to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I know there's a problem if every area asks the same. But I just wanted to make a special case on the grounds we've been through the independent hearings panel.
Right.
Yeah.
And although your deputation's focused on the prevention of intensification, do you think, have you got any thoughts on what council could do in regards to getting improved urban design?
No, because actually on hearings panels, it's meant to go through an urban design assessment, which it does, but it never holds anything. It's never strong enough, basically. I don't know how one does that. Yeah, but just to be aware that it doesn't make things a lot better.
Yeah. Thank you. Sarah, then Tim.
Kia ora, thanks, Helen.
Thank you.
I'm just wondering, given that Christchurch is pretty well surrounded by versatile soils,
Yes.
and we don't have an NPS on that yet, and we will continue to have a growing population
Yes.
over time, how do you propose that we cater for those future generations of Christchurch residents
Yeah.
who will need somewhere to live
Yes.
that is, relatively central with good public transport and is affordable?
Yes. Well, there's two answers probably. If you're looking at us in Riccarton, where the area we're talking about, it's quite cohesive with two heritage buildings, a cohesive community. Areas of Riccarton Road, some people would probably love to have high rise, probably not 6 stories, but they're quite run down old houses, probably rented. And I just think we should have council should have the flexibility, if you're going to do this, to choose which area. And I'm not sure you have a lot of choice, actually.
So you think we should be...
So I just think there's areas that would want to be intensified.
Yeah. So you think we should make a political choice over protecting some leafier suburbs over other suburbs that may be already run down and have social
Well,
issues?
it depends if they want... Yeah, it depends what those residents or landlords want, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. On your now, we zoned a lot of land post earthquake because I was on that earthquake council, and I understand there's sufficient land going forward. But I would protect, if you can, versatile soils. So anything that's left of versatile soils, please protect.
Well, there are some of those within the current infrastructure boundaries, even within those.
Which has been rezoned, has it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So-
We were under pressure to actually
Can we,
rezone.
well, I just want to move to Tim so he has time
Yeah.
to answer his question.
Is that enough, Sarah?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Just let's be clear, the independence hearing panel was pretty brutal with some suburbs. Your suburb did, pretty well,
Yes.
but others didn't. So,
Yes.
and they're still upset with regards to intensification. But with regards to coming to the council, which I applaud you for, and the others, and I can see Julie in the back there, who I've been working with, and our community board's been working with. But the national policy statement is a directive from central government, and you'll see
Yes.
some of the wording, and it's actually Auckland and Wellington centric rather than Christchurch.
Yes,
That's fairly obvious. But have you encouraged others with your long knowledge and long standing with regards to these areas, lobbied your MPs, both irrelevant of party, because you've got one MP in,
Yes.
you've got others that want to be in, and etc. Have you been lobbying, and have you been made that public?
We're just starting. We've certainly encouraging people to lobby. We'll probably have to have a meeting and encourage them more.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about the Condell Avenue area, which we didn't do, we were quite polite, and one of our members was going to go and speak to Jerry Brownlee at the time, and it didn't happen. But the Condell Avenue area, from what I understand, they sent emails and phone calls, and a huge amount of pressure went on.
And I can assure you
yes.
that others have done that too, and
Yes.
have had no luck whatsoever.
And no
so,
luck.
yeah. So, but I do think, to be very clear, that council can only do so much because it is it's a national policy statement from central government.
Yes, and I suppose
And be honest with that with regards to everybody.
I'm
and
going
trying
to
to
jump
you.
in because that was more of a statement than a question.
And so I'm just asking.
Thanks,
I'm asking
Helen.
Sorry.
Thank you very much.
Good,
You've
thank
been
you.
very clear. So thank
Thank you.
you for your time.